Emily Thorne had always dreamed of writing the next great novel. When she stumbled upon a secluded cottage for rent, nestled deep in the woods, it felt like fate. She packed her life into her car and drove for hours, eager for solitude and inspiration. The cottage was charming, if a bit worn. Its wooden beams and stone fireplace gave it a rustic appeal. She settled in quickly, her desk facing a large window overlooking the dense forest. For the first time in months, she felt at peace until the first night. Emily awoke to the faint sound of scratching. Sleepy and confused, she assumed it was a branch against the window. But as she turned on the bedside lamp, she saw it. Words scrawled across the living room wall. "I see you." Her heart raced. She lived alone. She grabbed a cloth, wiped the wall clean, and convinced herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her. But the next night, more words appeared. They weren't threatening at first. Simple observations like, "You write beautifully," and "We're watching." Emily tried to dismiss it as her imagination, but the presence felt real, almost tangible. The days passed quietly. Emily immersed herself in writing, exploring the woods during breaks. She noticed how isolated the cottage was. No neighbors for miles, just towering trees that whispered with every gust of wind. The townsfolk were friendly, but distant, offering cryptic warnings about the cottage's history. "No one stays long," the shopkeeper said, with a knowing glance. At night, the scratching continued. Every morning, new words appeared. "Nice try." "You can't hide." "Write more." Emily felt a growing unease. She tried ignoring the messages, but the more she resisted, the angrier the writings became. The walls seemed almost alive, breathing with silent demands. Emily's curiosity and fear grew. She began documenting the messages in her journal, determined to understand the phenomenon. She scoured local archives, finding little about the cottage's past. But a faded newspaper clipping hinted at previous tenants, authors who vanished without a trace. She wondered if the house wanted her to finish what they started. Emily felt an eerie kinship with those who had come before her, sensing their unfinished stories lingering within the walls. One night, Emily decided to challenge the unseen force. She left a note on the wall. "Who are you?" The next morning, her question was answered. "Your only chance." Her reflection in the window seemed different. Her eyes darker, her face more gaunt, as though the house was draining her. The words on the walls were no longer just observations. They were instructions. "Write what we tell you." Emily's fingers trembled as she realized she wasn't just a visitor in this house. She was its prisoner. Emily's days blurred into a cycle of frantic writing and sleepless nights. The house's grip tightened around her, its whispers growing louder and more demanding. She started leaving a notebook open beside her bed, documenting the messages before wiping them away. But one morning, the notebook was gone. The walls greeted her with a chilling phrase. We keep what you give." Emily's fingers trembled as she traced the words. She felt watched, not just by the house, but by something darker lurking within its walls. She began to notice subtle changes, objects moving on their own, cold drafts from nowhere, and shadows that didn't belong. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily visited the town's oldest resident, Margaret Holloway. Margaret's voice trembled as she recalled the house's dark past. "It doesn't want your stories," she whispered. "It wants your endings." Emily's mind spun. Every writer who stayed had vanished before finishing their work. Margaret warned her, "The house doesn't kill you. It keeps you forever writing, never done." Emily began to suspect that even the friendly librarian and the quiet shopkeeper knew more than they let on. The librarian's eyes lingered on her too long, and the shopkeeper always asked, "Still writing?" with an unsettling smile. Were they survivors or part of the house's curse? She found old letters in the library archives, hinting that some townsfolk were bound to the house, unable to warn newcomers. That night, Emily locked her doors and windows, but the scratching began inside the room. She screamed as invisible hands flipped through her manuscript, pages vanishing into thin air. The walls hissed, "Finish the story or be ours forever." Her laptop screen flickered, displaying text she hadn't typed. "You can't escape. You're ours." A shadow loomed over her shoulder, whispering directly into her ear, its breath cold and foul. Emily scoured through the manuscripts left behind by past writers, each one incomplete. She realized the house thrived on unfinished tales, feeding on the despair of stories untold. She discovered a hidden attic filled with typewriters, journals, and half-finished books. The air was thick with desperation. Her theory, if she completed a story, any story, she could break free. But would the house let her? Or would it twist her ending into something monstrous? She found an old diary from a past tenant who wrote, "I tried to finish, but the house rewrote my words. It made me its puppet." Emily made a choice. She began writing, not her novel, but a story about the house itself. The walls trembled with rage, ink seeping from the cracks. Shadows writhed around her, and whispers grew louder, promising torment. She knew there was no turning back now. She had to finish before the house finished her. Her hands ached, her vision blurred, and her reflection in the window showed her with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. She kept writing, fueled by fear and determination, knowing that her final sentence could be her salvation or her doom. The house seemed to fight her, but she whispered, "I will end this." Even as shadowy fingers curled around her shoulders, Emily's resolve hardened, but the house retaliated. Every corner of the cottage felt hostile. Objects she had never touched began appearing near her desk. Rusty typewriters, torn pages, quills dripping with dark ink. The walls closed in as the whispers grew louder, now screaming whenever she paused her writing. She felt her strength fading, but the need to finish her story became an obsession. Desperation led Emily to test a new theory. If the house wanted her to write endlessly, what if she ended the story abruptly? She typed a final sentence, and the house was no more. Silence followed. For a moment, she thought it worked, until the walls bled new words. Nice try, but endings are not yours to make. Her fear intensified, realizing the house would not accept an ending it didn't control. Emily confronted the librarian, who finally broke down. "We're trapped," she admitted. "We tried to warn you. The house binds us to its will. Every story unfinished feeds it." Emily's heart pounded. If the house could manipulate the townsfolk, it was more powerful than she imagined. She knew now, finishing her story was not just about escape. It was about destroying the house for good. With her last ounce of will, she sat down, ready to face whatever horror the house would unleash next. Emily's heart raced as the walls whispered threats in a cacophony of voices. She began seeing apparitions of past writers, their eyes pleading for release, their hands bloodied from endless writing. Shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, circling her, and the floor seemed to pulse like a heartbeat beneath her feet. Desperate, Emily tried to escape, but the doors wouldn't budge. Every window showed endless darkness, not the outside world. The house was no longer a structure. It was a living entity, feeding on her fear and creativity. She screamed for help, but her voice echoed back with sinister laughter. She tore through the attic's forgotten manuscripts, realizing that each author had tried to fight back and failed. But Emily refused to be the next victim. She typed relentlessly, her fingers cramping, blood seeping from her bitten lips. The walls grew frantic, threatening her with chilling images of her own demise. Emily's reflection became her tormentor, mocking her every word. But she whispered back, "I'm not done yet." Even as her vision darkened and the shadows closed in, she knew the final confrontation was near, and it would be her against the house's malevolent will, with no guarantee of survival. Emily's body trembled as the house unleashed its full fury. The walls groaned, the ceiling cracked, and shadows clawed at her from every corner. Her laptop screen flickered violently, deleting every word she typed. She screamed in frustration, feeling the weight of defeat looming. Her fingers hovered above the keys, but the house whispered, "You cannot win." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. Doubt crept in. Maybe it was right. Maybe she would never escape. The house's true form emerged, a swirling vortex of shadows, faces of past writers, twisted in agony. Their voices crying out in unison. Emily realized the house wasn't just feeding on creativity. It was a collection of lost souls, bound together by unfinished works. She saw herself among them, her own face flickering in the void. The house's voice boomed, "Join us!" But Emily clenched her fists. She would not surrender. With every ounce of strength, Emily typed the final words. And with her last breath, she set them free. A piercing scream echoed as the house writhed in agony. The shadows dissipated, the walls cracked and crumbled, and the trapped souls vanished into light. Emily collapsed, gasping for air. Morning light flooded the room, the curse broken. She packed her things, leaving the ruined cottage behind, but as she walked away, a faint whisper lingered in the breeze. There's always another story. Emily's haunted eyes glanced back once more before she disappeared into the forest, forever changed but finally free. As Emily stepped outside, her body weakened, but her spirit unbroken. She felt the weight of countless souls lifting. The morning light felt alien after endless nights of terror. She took one last glance at the crumbling cottage, but a flicker in the attic window made her shiver, a faint silhouette, watching. Her mind replayed the horrors, the whispers, the apparitions, the living shadows that had haunted every moment. She knew the house was gone, but the fear lingered. As she walked through the forest, Emily's thoughts were a jumble of relief and dread. What if the house found another way back? What if another rider stumbled upon its ruins? Her hands, still trembling, gripped her notebook tightly. She flipped it open and saw the final sentence she had typed. But beneath it, new words began to appear in an all too familiar scrawl. The end is just the beginning. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She slammed the notebook shut, but the eerie sense of being watched never left her. She vanished into the forest, the echoes of the house's sinister presence a ghost she could never outrun. The house was gone, but its story lived on.